please give Mr. Jeffrey Archer a very, very warm virtual welcome.
Good morning, or good afternoon as it is in India.
It is. It's
Veena?
good evening. Yes.
Veena, you made a big mistake. You made a big mistake, Veena. I have 5 grandchildren.
Ah, all right. I say corrected.
Little Jack has arrived recently.
Ah, congratulations. That is amazing. That's amazing. So then it's 3 grandsons and 2 granddaughters. Is that right?
You got it.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you for correcting me and for giving us that little fun fact. Congratulations again. We are just simply thrilled to have you with us.
That's very kind, and I'm thrilled to be. Everyone knows my love of India, which has been going on for many, many years. And I'm only sorry that during lockdown, during COVID, I haven't been able to visit you because I usually come once a year. But I'm planning to come back as quickly as possible.
We look forward to that. We look forward to that. Thank you for saying that. I do have a call out for all the Amazonians who have logged in from across India to listen to you today. Many are eagerly waiting to ask you questions, and we're just going to get to that in a bit. But I do want to tell all our Amazonians that we have an exciting contest for you. If you want to win a copy of Next in Line, we have a social media contest where 5 copies of Mr. Archer's latest book are up for grabs. So do check out the contest details in the description box just below the live screen that you have, that's visible to you. And you can also check out for details in the chat box and do participate. So with that, without any further ado, I'm going to jump in and have a great conversation with Mr. Archer. So, Mr. Archer, can I just say that your writing has transcended generations? I grew up reading your books as a teenager. My all-time favorite was Cain and Abel. And when my daughter sort of grew out of reading Nancy Drew and, Hardy Boys, the first book I recommended to her was Cain and Abel. So it's like it's transcending generations. So would love to know what sparks or motivates you to write.
I was a member of Parliament, Veena, and I was politics was the career I wanted to follow. In fact, I'd entered the House of Commons at the age of 29. And I made a very foolish investment in a company called Aquablast. And I invested all I had and was even more stupid. I borrowed more money because the Bank of Boston had told me that it couldn't fail. And I was naive enough in those days to think that if a bank vice president told you something, they didn't do it without a great deal of thought. And I lost everything. And I left the House of Commons after 5 very happy years at the age of 34 and sat down and wrote my first book, and Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, the story of 4 young men who between them lose everything and steal it back. But they're not allowed to go over the top because that would be stealing. They're only allowed to take back from Mr. Big exactly what he stole from them. And that had a propitious start, Veena. 16 publishers turned it down. The 17th publisher managed to just about buy it for £3,000. And it only sold 3,000 copies. So it wasn't exactly a great start. But as you quite rightly point out, the big breakthrough was Cain and Abel. That sold 1 million in the first week. I'm told by the Times of India that 100 million people in India have read Cain and Abel. So that did change my whole life, and it's been a thrilling career as a writer and a great privilege, and a great deal of that success and happiness has come through the Indian people.
That's a fascinating story. Just to know how you made that segue into writing. Thank you for sharing that with us. We'd love to know a little bit about your new book. I read it over the weekend and just couldn't put it down. So would love for you to share a little bit about it so that all our viewers get a little bit of a teaser and a trailer on the book?
Well, after the Clifton Chronicles, I had several letters from fans all over the world saying they were fascinated by Harry Clifton, who was himself an author, and his hero in the books he wrote was William Warwick. And many people wrote to me and said, we want you to write about William Warwick. But I thought, I've never done crime in that sense. So I thought I have to be different. So I decided to take a young man, William Warwick, while he's at school, and he wants to join the Metropolitan Police Force against the wishes of his father. His father wants him to become a QC, to go to Oxford and read law and join him in chambers. And he defies him and becomes a constable on the beat. And then I decided I was going to have every single William Warwick book would be a single book in its own right. Didn't matter which one you started on, although I'm very flattered that you finished this in a weekend. But each book would be a different rank. So he'd begin as a constable on the beat, then he'd become a sergeant, then he'd become an inspector, then he'd become a chief inspector, then he'd become a superintendent, and I'd take it right the way through until he became commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. And I also decided each book would be a different type of crime. So the first book was art, fraud, theft, and robbery. The second book was drugs. The third book was murder. And here we are now on next in line, and he's in charge of royalty protection. So he has to protect the Queen, and there's a subplot where Ross Hogan, Inspector Hogan, is the personal protection officer to Princess Diana. Now, I had the privilege of working with Princess Diana on her charity work, particularly as an auctioneer, a charity auctioneer. That's my hobby, and got to know her quite well. So I'm hoping you felt when you read the book, Fina, that I had captured Princess Diana, and I hope you felt, wow, he knows her, because that's important, that the reader thinks there's some truth in this. And so the new book, Next in Line, is indeed on royalty protection when William Warwick is a superintendent.
That's great. And I can say for sure, Mr. Archer, that I felt there was a personal connection somewhere that you had with, or you knew Princess Diana personally, because I could sense, her her being mischievous, a little bit of lightness in the conversations, and just that fun element that you bring into, even though she has the status of a princess. So I definitely felt that.
That's very kind. And I hope your Indian readers will as well.
I hope so too. Well, as we're talking about the book, and thank you for sharing a little bit about that, I'm curious to know, when we're talking about Next in Line, like, what is it that really sort of excites you the most about this particular book? Because is it and just sort of to give you some aspects that I was, sort of thinking about, is it the plot? Is it the characters? Is it the setting? Is it Operation Overboard, which is the climax of the story? Like, which aspect, really excites you?
Well, it's interesting to say that, because they held a survey some years ago on what readers thought about my writing. And they do I don't understand these things. They did what they call a cloud. And you see lots of clouds, and you see names the reader thinks important. So when they did the survey, and they came here to the flat, 10 of them, and they sat around with me and they said, what do you think the public have put in the biggest cloud? And I said, storytelling. And they said, no, character. So clearly people like William Warwick, and they liked Harry Clifton, because storytelling was in a slightly smaller cloud. It was number 2. So the answer to your question, Vina, is I do enjoy my characters. I do enjoy William Warwick. I do enjoy Ross Hogan, who's a bit of a rogue and takes risks, and Miles
Right.
Faulkner, who's not your
Art
usual
collector.
criminal,
Hmm.
well educated, very clever, takes the police on at their own level, and has a battle with them every time, sometimes loses, sometimes. And the battle goes on, as it does in Next in Line. But in Next in Line, because a member of the royal family is involved, Faulkner decides he'll help the police rather than hinder them.
Mm. That's great to know. So, talking about characters, um, would love to know a little bit more about William Warwick. I mean, you talked to us about, that path that you take him through, but he's such an intriguing character. So we'd love to know, how did you visualize, how did you define his personality? How did it all begin? Is it somebody you know, or like, tell us how it all started?
Well, I always say to authors, write about what you know about. Write about people you know about, write about subjects you know about, and the audience will know and feel confident and safe with you. My chief researcher is called Chief Superintendent Johnny Sutherland. Now, John Sutherland ran the murder squad, and he had a mental breakdown, what he describes as one murder too many. And I met him in a church. I met him at an Advent carol service for the House of Lords and the House of Commons, when he was reading one of the piece from the Bible. He was doing a piece from the Bible. I met him afterwards, and I thought, what a good man. And asked him if he'd just retired from the police. And I asked him if he'd become my chief researcher, make sure I didn't make mistakes, didn't have 3 pips on his shoulder for an inspector when it should be 2 pips on his shoulder for the inspector. And I've got to know him over the years. And the answer to your question, Veena, is it's based on him. William Warwick is really Chief Superintendent Johnny Sutherland, a much admired and greatly loved man in the Metropolitan Police, who travels all over the country giving lectures so people can learn about the police. But I'm afraid the breakdown was a big thing in his life, and I'm very glad that I'm now privileged to be working with him. But the answer to your question is William Warwick is based on Johnny Sutherland.
Wow, that's really interesting to know. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm sure our viewers would love that little fun fact as well. So, you talked about the book being set right in, the Buckingham Palace, the Windsor Castle, the Kensington Palace. Would love to know a little bit more about, what sort of research did you have to do before you began writing the book?
Well, I think I've been very privileged over the years, having been a member of Parliament and having been a member of the House of Lords for the past 27 years. I've seen all these buildings. I've dined in them. I've been there. I've met members of the royal family there. So when I write about them, I'm able to describe them. I'm able to do a dining room. I'm able to do a sitting room, a drawing room, a front room. I'm able to do the build up to walking into the building, or whatever it might be, the sort of pictures that hang on the wall. Even in the case of Next in Line, the actual cup and saucer that Diana drank out of, which company made it, because people love those sort of details. Right. And so, yes, the answer to your question is I've been very privileged over the years, having worked 11 years with Margaret Thatcher and having seen the buildings you've just described, of being able to get into the books that knowledge. I try to do it casually, not throw it at the reader, just bring it in casually so they realize you've been there. But the answer is you can't invent it. You can't describe what Buckingham Palace is like if you haven't been inside. I mean, you can read a book and get an idea, but you can't feel of it. You can't get the feel when you go up that wide staircase and you turn left into the room that leads to the throne room, and you see those amazing pictures that Van Dyck hanging on the wall of King Charles I. And now, of course, ironically, we have King Charles III on the throne. So it's,
Right.
but those sort of things you can't write unless you've actually stood there.
Yeah. Right. And it goes back to what you just said a little earlier, write about what you know. And right, it comes to life. And we felt it come to life. I felt it come to life. And I'm sure our viewers, when they read the book, would feel it come to life, as you take them through that experience. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to go back to our viewers and those of you who joined us a couple of minutes late. I would want to share with you that in case you missed the beginning of today's event and you're interested in getting Mr. Archer's latest book, Next in Line, please go ahead and participate in the social media contest we're running for you. The details are in the description box below the screen, please.
I mean, Veena, were you actually suggesting live on television that an Indian could be late? I've never known an Indian to be late for any of it. I've never late. Indians are never late, Veena. Truth is, they're never on time.
I love your sense of humor. I love your sense of humor. But I just want to say, Mr. Archer, that we're all at work and our wonderful Amazonians who have joined us today are all at work, and they've made time out today to come and participate in the event.
Very good of them.
I know thousands of them have signed up, and they're taking time off to be with you. Yes, cheers to that, and cheers to all our wonderful Amazonians. Well, I'm going to go back and jump into conversation with you again, Mr. Archer, and want to get to know a little bit more about, you and the novel writing process. And the first question I have to you is, what does this process, what is it like for you, this entire novel writing process? You did talk at the start of, our conversation today about how you, moved into writing and about the first book that you wrote. And, but what is that process like for you today? Because you've written so many books after that.
The process is that I rise about 5:30 in the morning. I'm at my desk at 6 and pick up my pen because I handwrite every word. I do 2 hours from 6 until 8 because I'm a lark, not an owl. I do 2 hours from 10 until 12, 2 hours from 2 until 4, 2 hours from 6 until 8, light supper, go to bed about 9:30, 10, up again at 5:30. The first draft will take about 50 days, about 350 hours. And I go on for about 1,000 hours and will hand the 14th draft, 15th draft into my publishers. In between, my personal assistant, Alison, types it up to begin with triple spaced, and I work with a pencil and a rubber, and she then brings it down to double space. She then brings it down to single space until we know we're there. And when I'm only changing the odd word, or perhaps even a sentence every 10 pages, a paragraph every 25 pages, I know I'm there and hand it in to my publisher.
Wow, that takes a lot of discipline. I mean, I'm just trying to think about, starting your day early, writing, taking a break, going back to writing, another break, going back to writing again. So my question is, have you ever had or faced a writer's block? And if yes,
certainly
how
not.
do you get out of the rut?
What a waste. What a silly question. No, certainly not.
Okay.
I've named my home in Mallorca writer's block. But no, I can't pretend I've actually never known what I'm going to do the next day. What I do come up against sometimes, Veena, is I get an idea that takes me along a certain road, and I can't see how to get back on the main road because I've taken my villain or my hero in a certain direction. I've plonked them in a load of trouble, and I then have to think how to get them out. That can be fascinating in itself, of course. But I've never had writer's block as such. In fact, I know the outline topic for my next 3 books. My
Wow.
problem, Vina, is I'm 82 and I have to live to 86 to get William Warwick up to being Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. But I'm determined to do it.
Well, as I said, you've transcended generations. So you're going to do it. I will wait for your books. Yeah, no, that's great. Well, thank you for sharing that. So, would love to know, Mr. Archer, a little bit about you as a person and you as a writer.
Well, I have a fascinating and privileged life. I can't deny that, and I'm more and more aware of that as I grow older. My hobbies, I'm a charity auctioneer. That's my big hobby. My love's a sport, and I think any Indian who knows me knows I'm passionate about cricket. I've had so many friends, beginning with my life at Oxford when I knew the Nawab of Patodi, and we remained friends all our lives. And since I've had the privilege of knowing Sunil Gavaskar and Amir Kumble, Sachin Tendulkar, V.V.S. Laxman, Rahul Dravid, because they know and understand my love of cricket, and I met them through their passion for books. Actually, not true with Sachin Tendulkar. It's his wife's mother. It's his mother-in-law who has a passion for my books. Whereas in the case of V.V.S. Laxman and Rahul Dravid, we met because they're genuine fans. But I was fans of theirs always. I love the game so much that I consider one of the greatest test matches the world has ever seen was India versus Australia, when V.V.S. Laxman and Rahul Dravid stayed at the crease all day, and turned around the entire game. What an achievement. So my love of cricket, my love of Indian cricket goes back many, many years and continues. And I'm, of course, fascinated by your present team. I think there are 2 or 3 very truly great players in your present team. And I always enjoy the India-England series, a real battle. Mr. Kohli doesn't like losing. A tough captain. We've had to face him. And you've had Dhoni was a very fine captain too. We've had a few years of fun, and we'll go on having fun. If I have any sadness, and I say this, I'm not a lover of 2020. I like a test match. I like to see a century scored properly, or 5 wickets taken properly, which is why Kapil Dev remains a great friend of mine. He too has been very kind over the years, and what an all-rounder. Secretly in my heart, I should have been captain of the England cricket team, but I failed and became an author.
Yeah. Well, you have lots of people who are glad you became an author for sure. And I'm pretty sure and convinced that a lot of our viewers who love cricket, as you know, in India, cricket is a religion, are excited to hear you share a little bit about, your association with some of our cricketers here in India. But before we move on to questions from the audience, Mr. Archer, I have one last question. You've talked so much about your love for India, your love for, cricket, your association with some of our cricketers, your visits to India, and that you're planning to come back soon. Can we look forward to a book set in India?
No. I told you and you weren't listening, Veena. You must write what you know about.
Oh, right.
You must stick to what you feel safe with.
Yeah.
I am not R.K. Narayan, a great, great storyteller who has taught me about India, but I wouldn't have the nerve to dare to touch his land and walk onto his field. Here is a genius who can tell you about a taxpayer, a tax collector in a small village, and make you turn the page. No, I do what I do, and I've left great men like him, and I consider him a giant of Indian literature. Oh, of course you've had the Nobel Prize winners. Of course you had the great legendary names. But for me, Arcane Orion is that amazing combination of writer and storyteller.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yes, no, I haven't forgotten. I remember you saying write about what you know. So you just, affirm that as well. Fabulous. Thank you. I so loved the interaction with you. I loved your humor. I loved the little anecdotes that you brought in. We're now going to move on to questions from our audience. And I know they're waiting to ask you some questions. So the first question is from Leela Narayana, and I'm going to read out her question for you. In this age of powerful visual media, any advice for parents to help inculcate the habit of reading in their young children? How can we make them come back to reading from the more passive watching?
It's a tricky one, that one, and I'm very aware of it because many parents write to me and say, I started my child on Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, because it's more for a 12, 13, 14-year-old. I'm not as depressed. I must say that I'm not as depressed as our questioner might be. When I was last in India, I went to the Jaipur Book Festival and then spoke at an amazing school, mixed school, and of very well-educated young children. And they clearly were big readers. I take it's up to the parent and the teacher to ease them towards reading. Yesterday, I went on television to talk about Her Late Majesty the Queen, and as I walked back past Buckingham Palace, a road sweeper came up to me and said, "When's the next book, Jeff?" And I thought, that's wonderful. Here is he reading. I said, "Well," he said, I don't like television." He said, "It's getting very repetitive," and he said, "I know. I wait for your next book. Thank you." And so there's still a lot of people out there reading, but I take the point that we've got to guide children back. In a nation like yours, which is so set on education and so set on achievement coming from education, and rightly so, well, start reading.
That's wonderful, and I'm sure Leela will have a story to tell. Children, young children. Thank you for sharing that. The next question is from Kanika Puri, and I'm going to read out her question to you. She says, "Sir, I have read all of your bestsellers. You have written a lot of thrillers in your writing career. What led you to start Clifton Chronicles?"
Well, the Clifton Chronicles was a strange situation. I was 70 years old, and I thought, I want to write a series of 3 books. And then it became 5 books. And then it became 7 books. Because can I live to 77? I thought, the Makers says in the Bible that you will do 70 year and 10. So I thought, well, I need a little bit of help here because I want to go to 77. I want to do a sort of autobiography. So I wrote the story of a boy born in the back streets of Bristol in England, and how he wins a scholarship to Bristol Grammar School, which is a very fine grammar school, and then gets a place at Oxford and becomes a writer. But his best friend is a politician. So I was able to sort of combine the two, get them both in, get my love of the House of Commons, my love of politics, my love of writing all into one book. I have to admit to you, Veena, I was shocked by the success of the Clifton Chronicles. Been number 1 all over the world. In fact, in Germany on one occasion, 4 of the books were in the top 15. So it was a kind of another breakthrough. And then I reached 77 and thought, well, what am I going to do now? And that's when I started the Clifton, after the Clifton Chronicles, I started the William Warwick series. And I will go on until I fall over. I have no intention of stopping until I fall over.
We love that. We love your energy there. Thank you for sharing that. Love that response. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Deepthi Dhawan. And she says storytelling is a critical skill for project and people managers alike. And we have a lot of them here on Amazon. What are the most important steps to learn the skill of storytelling?
I hate to say this because it hurts.
Mm.
You can't learn to play a cover drive like Roll Rabbit.
Mm.
You can't learn to sing a song. You can't learn to be a ballet dancer. That's a little unfair in the sense you can learn, but if you're going to do it well,
Yeah.
I'd have to be honest and say it's a God-given gift. That's my piece of luck. Every day I wake up with a new idea or know where I want the next chapter to go, where I want to twist it. If you say to me, how do you do that, Jeffrey? I haven't got a clue. I do not know how I do it. I wish I could tell you. In fact, I think the most common question I ever get is, tell me how to be a storyteller. And I can't. That is what I do. I'm very privileged and very lucky. I think you can hone any talent.
Mm.
I think you can get better by damned hard work. But the actual, to use your words, the art of storytelling is a God-given gift.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for your response. I'm going to move over to the next question from Ariharan Vijayarangam. And his question is, has there ever been a time when your initial personification of a character changed entirely by the time you completed the book?
Wow, good question.
Yeah.
And sometimes not all, even when you reach the end of the book. The wicked Virginia in the Clifton Chronicles. What a wicked woman, Lady Virginia. I thought, I'm going to kill you off. You're becoming tiresome. I'm going to put you in the witness box against my heroine, Emma. And Emma, of course, will win because Emma's a saintly person, whereas Lady Virginia is a wicked piece of work. So I put her in that morning. I got out of bed having decided that's where I was going. And I sat down at my desk and I put Virginia in the witness box, and she's facing one of the leading QCs in the country. She's facing one of the great barristers, and the barrister asks her a question, and I wrote the question, and she beat it off. I wrote what she said. I don't know, tricky. And then he asks another hard question. She says, surely you can do better than that. You're not a gossip columnist, you're a barrister. And then he asks another. And in the end, she totally defeats the barrister. So by the end of 6 pages of her cross-examination in the witness box in the Old Bailey, she had won. And my barrister, who I wanted to win, had lost. So sometimes the pen goes off in another direction, Veena, and you're unwise not to follow it. Go with where it's going. I mean, you might tear it up at the end of the day, but if it's gone well, you left. So at the end of that trial, Virginia won, and she wasn't meant to win. That wasn't planned. But once you go with something like that and see where it's going, the reader will love it because the reader wasn't expecting it to go that way either.
Right. Right. Fascinating. Go where the pen goes. Thank you, Ariharan. I hope that was a fascinating answer to a fascinating question. The next one is from Panama Belatanda, and her question is, which book did you enjoy writing the most and why?
It's a bit pathetic of me to say I always enjoy them. I have a sentimental, for obvious reasons, a sentimental feeling about Cain and Abel because it changed my whole life. And many people think it's the best book I've ever written. But the critics don't agree. The critics think A Prisoner of Birth, which is my attempt to write the modern Count of Monte Cristo. And also they feel my story of Everest, the story of Mallory, trying to climb Everest in 1924. Did he reach the top? And when they found his body 700 feet from the top, was he on the way up or was he on the way down? Paths of Glory. And there's a little sentimental book club for not a penny more not a penny less, the first one. So I'm not
Right.
sure I have a favorite, but I'm always fascinated which the public think is their favorite and why.
Right. Right. Thank you. That's awesome to know. And I know it's hard to pick a favorite. It's all your work. So I love how you put it back on the public. That's a good answer. I'm going to move on to the next question from Sri Ramya Eliswarapu. And their question is, how can one stay true to the art of writing? Um, well, the second part of the question says break the writer's block, but then you already said there is no writer's block.
Correct.
So maybe you could just answer the first part of the question.
Well, I think writing is a craft, as painting is, as building a wall is. It's a craft. You get better at the craft. You become more experienced. Perhaps there are times when you save time because you know you've made those mistakes in the past. But it doesn't stop the fact, to use your words, that it is an art, to use your words. And yes, you can become more accomplished. Yes, you can become more professional. But the art is there always. And if you're very, very lucky, you don't meet up with writer's block.
Got it. Fingers and toes crossed. So I'm curious to know, Mr. Archer, just as a follow-up to that, have you seen a change in the speed of your writing or the ease with which you write?
I see the books are becoming slightly shorter. I mean, Cain and Abel was 250,000 to 300,000 words. Prisoner of Birth was 260, 70,000 words. The Clifton Chronicles were all about 120,000 words, about 400 pages. The Warwicks have been nearer to 100,000 words, more like 350 to 400 pages. Right. So either I've moved with the times, because long books are not as popular as they used to be, or I'm just getting older, Veena. But it doesn't stop me doing 14 drafts.
It's not going to stop you. No, it's not.
No, and it doesn't stop me working very hard indeed. And it doesn't stop me wanting people to say what you said at the beginning of the program. You can't put this book down. That is what every author prays to hear.
That's great. That's great. Really good to know that. Our next question is from Karthikeyan Alagarswamy. And their question is, what's your advice for new non-fiction writers?
Well, I don't have a great deal of experience of non-fiction, but I would say when you choose your subject, because non-fiction has to have a subject, it might be solar energy, it might be Winston Churchill, it might be motor racing. You have to have a subject. You'd better know your subject pretty damn well if you're going to tell other people about it. That's number one. Number two, try if you can to pick a subject which will attract a lot of readers. I've just seen a friend of mine who wants to write a book on an unknown statesman in the 18th century. And he wants to write it because this person was a relation of his, very distinguished, a foreign minister 300, 250 years ago. And he asked me to be honest with him. And I said, it'll sell 3,000 books. But if you write a book about Nelson, or you write a book about Gandhi, or you write whatever you do, you've got a much better chance. So I would say to any non-fiction writer, you've got to do the usual study. You read all the great non-fiction books. But unless you want it just for the family, it better be something the public are interested in.
That's really helpful advice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. The next question is from Debabrata, and the question is, how do you deal with unfavorable criticism or reviews of your books? Has your response changed over time with more experience?
Well, the critics, as you know, have been very generous lately, so I'm hardly in a position to complain. But yes, there was a critic in the Liverpool Post, which did hurt, and I remember it very well indeed. It was a criticism of Cain and Abel. They said, this is Jeffrey Archer's third boring book. You won't enjoy this, and in a month's time, no one will remember it, so don't bother. That's 40 years ago, and we're on the 132nd reprint. So stuff the Liverpool Post.
Well, thank you for sharing that and for being honest there. My vote is for Cain and Abel, so I get it. Right, okay. I have a question from Sunke, who asks, would you ever write a book on cricket? I'm sure he's a cricket fan. I'm sure there's
I often put a chapter in the latest book, Next in Line. There is a vital cricket match when something is going on, which, as you will remember, Veena, makes a whole difference to the plot because of what one person does because of that cricket match. So I sometimes include a cricket match without slipping it in, again, because it uses knowledge and love that you can get onto the page. And those of us who've watched Legan know how much people love a good story about cricket. But no, I wouldn't spend a whole book on cricket. And may I remind you with Legan too, just to remind the one or two of you watching who've seen that film, that the umpires were English. And if they hadn't behaved properly, you wouldn't have won the match. Don't forget that.
That is hilarious. Thank you, Mr. Archer, for that response. And I'm sure most of our viewers would have seen Lagan. This question is from Saurabh, who asks, who's your favorite cricketer?
It's impossible to answer because I've had the privilege and honor of knowing so many great cricketers and watching so many great cricketers. I can remember an incident that will stick in my mind and makes me believe why I love the game. It was when Kumble was captain of India and he was in Australia. I think Mr. Ponting behaved disgracefully over the Harbhajan incident. And I watched the way Kumble behaved as captain. And I thought any young person watching this should say, that's how you behave when you're under pressure. That's how you behave when things aren't going well. And his example to young Indians in that particular match was very moving for me. I met him in an airport. He came up to me in an airport and said, are you Jeffrey Archer? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, I thought he was going to say, I love your book. So I'm out. He said, Stan, would you be kind enough to stay there for a moment? I said, yes, I would, Mr. Kumble. I'll be quite happy to stay here for a moment. And he rang his wife. And he said, I've got Jeffrey Archer on the line. I'll put you through.
I love that. That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing. I love all these little anecdotes that you're sharing. And the questions are ranging from cricket to books to, many different things. So I think we'll have time for just one last question before we do a small rapid fire and have some fun. So this one is from Shubhankar Sharma, who asks, do you devote much time to plotting or do you just go with the flow?
Well, you've got to be careful. You've got to be careful to do too much devoting to plotting before you start, because you can guarantee that no sooner have you written 3 pages than it's gone in a totally different direction. And you go to bed that night saying, no, that isn't what I plotted. That isn't what I planned. But you've got to follow it and you've got to go with it. So yes, I know where I'm going, often for as much as 2 chapters. And recently I have tried to blot out a bit more. But in Cain and Abel, I can tell you, for example, and in the William Warwicks, the early William Warwicks, hadn't got a clue where I was going. Now, it's a hell of a risk because you go to bed at night without knowing where you're going. The joy of that, Veena, is when it comes the next morning, when the reader reads it, when you read it, You also don't know where I'm going. How can you know where I'm going if
Right.
I don't know where I'm going? I've never had a letter in 40 years that said, I worked out the ending straight away, Jeffrey. I don't know why you bothered. It's never happened because I haven't worked out the ending before it's happened. I pray and hope, and I've been lucky so far.
Fascinating. Like you said, go where the pen goes.
Mm.
Love that. Well, I have one last question. While I said the previous one was the last, I have a big a please in bold. So I'm going to ask you this one last question before we move on. And this one is from Madhumita Hassan, who asks, how do you come up with such astonishingly intriguing plots and twists with every turn of the page?
Well,
Please tell us.
I'd love to tell you that it just happens. You're turning the page, to use your expression, and you're writing a sentence and you think, wow, I'll go in the opposite direction. That'll tease them. And you make it twist that way. But then, of course, you've got to get out of the problem. You've got to get away from the twist. And sometimes that takes a little longer, but you spot the twist and you think, I'll make that happen, and that'll fool the reader. And that's fun. But the answer to the question is the pen is moving and you think, oh, I'll go there. I'll go there. I was writing this morning between 6 and 8. And I had this comment on Inspector Hogan, whose wife has been murdered. And he's got this little girl, Jojo, who's his daughter, as you know. And they go and live with Superintendent Warwick and his wife, Beth. And I wrote this, it just came in that split second that he was talking about their life and how wonderful privileged the child was to live in such a warm family with other nice children, Artemisia and Peter, the brother and sister, the children. And I wrote the sentence this morning that he was envious, but not jealous. And that sentence just came in a split second. I hadn't thought about it. It just came. He was envious, but not jealous. Because it summed the character up of Inspector Hogan, the sort of man he was. So the answer to the question is, I haven't got a clue. And if I had, I would tell you.
It feels like you're surprising yourself every single day.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's the fun. That's what keeps one young.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for answering those questions from our audience. And a big thank you to the audience for asking such amazing questions.
Big thank you.
Right. Yes, a big thank you.
Any author realizes that it's a privilege and an honor to be read. You can't read a book in under a couple of days. I mean, I do have readers who say I picked it up I bought it from the shop. I took it straight home. I finished it at 3 o'clock in the morning. But most people take 2 or 3 days, possibly a week, to read a book. And every author who doesn't realize what a privilege and honor that is to take that amount of time out of their lives is a fool, Veena, and will always be a fool. So I am extremely grateful and lucky. And I've been very aware over the years the role Amazon has played in my life. They've lifted the books up to another level, and I will be thankful to that for the rest of my life. In a day and age when people say less people are reading, the truth is because of Amazon, more people are reading, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. And I'm happy to say that here and now.
Thank you. We really appreciate your humility in sharing that. And now I'm going to move on to rapid fire with just a couple of questions.
Fire.
Yes, are you ready?
Don't forget I'm 82.
But you're so full of energy, so you're going to nail this one. All right. First question to you, Mr. Archer. What was your favorite childhood book?
Childhood book? I think Just William by Rushmore Compton. Every child who read it thought they were Just William. I mean, we were all in short trousers getting our knees dirty, causing trouble. What little child doesn't? Beautifully written and a very, very, and still believable.
Awesome. Thank you. What's your favorite genre of books to read?
Well, I do love stories about human beings. So say Vanity Fair or any Jane Austen book. Easy to say that because they are classics and they deserve
Right.
they're called classics because that's what they deserve to be called. I love the story of a human being, and I think Becky Sharp is probably my heroine. I mean, what a girl! And I love
Right.
stories where girls kill the boys. I think they're the most fun. Uh, so yes, that sort of story of triumph over disaster, which I try to do myself, are my favorites.
Great. Thank you. Who's your favorite Indian author? I think you
Oh,
gave it away, but just
Arcane Narayan.
confirming. Yeah.
Oh no,
All right.
Arcane Narayan. Arcane Narayan should have got the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
And who said that? Not Jeffrey Archer. Who said that? Graham Greene said Arcane Narayan should have got the Nobel Prize. And I agree with Mr. Greene.
Great. Thank you. What's your preference? Kindle, Audible, paperback, hardcover?
Oh, hardcover. I want a real book. I want to turn the page. I want to hold the book. I want to feel it in my hands. I want to know where I am, what page I'm on, where I've been. No, I like a real book. In fact, I do something very wicked, which you can do as well, because it's very wicked. Sometimes I read on my Kindle the sample, and then I go and buy the book, which is very naughty indeed.
Thank you for sharing that. What's the last thing you bought on Amazon?
This week, I'm reading, they've just sent me, actually, Ian McEwan, who is one of our truly great writers. And the reviews for the latest book have been very flattering. He normally writes a couple of hundred pages, and I learned so much from him because he's such a fine writer. But this is 500 pages, and I'm going to start it this weekend. I'm looking forward to it so much. I'm not starting now. I'm going to wait for the weekend and begin it. So that's the latest book I'm reading.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. Thank you so much for joining us today. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, as I'm sure did all our Amazonians who tuned in. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you once again, Mr. Archer, and thank you,
Thank you.
Amazonians. Have a lovely day, everybody.
You too. Thank you very much indeed.